Today we're headed to Rolling Fork, Mississippi, where the President and First Lady will meet with community leaders and residents devastated by the powerful tornadoes that struck this close-knit town and neighboring areas last weekend. In Rolling Fork alone, 13 people tragically lost their lives. Their loved ones are grieving immense loss as they begin the daunting task of sorting through the wreckage and rebuilding a town that is now unrecognizable. President Biden and the First Lady will reaffirm their commitment to supporting the people of Mississippi as long as it takes. They'll thank the first responders who worked around the clock to rescue survivors and get people to safety. And they'll receive a briefing from federal, state, and local officials on the ongoing response and recovery efforts. The President and the First Lady will be joined by Governor Reeves, First Lady Reeves, Senator Hyde-Smith, Congressman Thompson, Mayor Walker, and additional state and local and tribal officials as well. At the President's direction, we have over 300 federal personnel on the ground supporting recovery efforts. Today, the President will announce that the federal government will cover 100% of the cost of the state's emergency measures for the next 30 days. These measures include removing debris, operating shelters, and paying overtime to first responders. He will also announce that FEMA will open disaster recovery centers in storm-ravaged counties to help residents access the federal resources available to them. With that, I will turn it over to Administrator Criswell, who was on the ground in Mississippi on Saturday to provide an update on the response effort to date. Go ahead.
Thank you, Karine. Good morning, everybody. Yes, as you just heard, we are on our way over there. We have over 300 personnel from FEMA on the ground, as well as many of our federal partners. I think, as you know, we're looking at thousands of damaged and destroyed homes across several counties in Mississippi. But we also know that there's damage to infrastructure, to the water systems, to the power grid, much of which is beginning to come back online. But some of it that will require some long-term rebuilding, and we want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that's going to make those facilities more resilient. And we also heard stories of the post office in Rolling Fork, where we're going to go, that was damaged, and concerns that people had because that's where they get their medicine from. But the Postal Service has been able to set up a temporary facility so we can make sure that those services continue to be supported in the community. I would say to date, right now we have members of our Incident Management Assistance Team that are embedded with the state EOC to help coordinate the efforts. Also our Disaster Survivor Assistance Teams, which are going door to door in all of the declared counties, not only helping them register for assistance, but also trying to needs are so we can bring in and get it to Karine to give to you, how much money we've spent in the past to build storm shelters in these communities just in Mississippi. We're going to work together. I'm here with Secretary Fudge today, and we talked about we both have programs that can help homeowners build safe rooms in their homes, and we want to make sure that we're aligning our programs to do that, but also to work with the state on how they can build additional storm shelters through some of our hazard mitigation programs.
How concerned are you about the potential for severe thunderstorms and more tornadoes potentially today?
We are always watching the weather, and I'm very concerned about the amount of storms that are coming in and the storms that we might see today. You know, after this storm, I talked with the National Weather Service, and they were comparing what the weather systems are looking like now to that which of what we saw in 2011, where we saw the Joplin, Missouri tornado and the outbreaks in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And so the most important thing that we can do is help make sure people understand what their risk is, especially as we're seeing it build, and help them know where they're going to get information, because we know that they come fast. We want them to be able to take immediate action to protect themselves and their families.
Did they have enough warnings about these tornadoes? Was there enough alerts going out?
Yeah, I believe there is, right? I think everybody receives information in different ways. We were watching this weather how they're going to get information, because they all receive it different. If you have sirens in your neighborhood, you'll know that that's one way that you'll get it. The National Weather Service uses our emergency alert system to send warnings over cell phones up on the right, and so people just need to know where they're going to get that and watch this as we're starting to see it develop. We can predict that we're going to have severe weather. Where it's going to happen, that's the piece that we don't know until it gets almost right on top of them.
On the ground, and what was the top airspeed? Do we know that at this point?
The top airspeed, I know that the initial reports are that the tornado was on the ground for somewhere around 100 miles, an hour or so. The National Weather Service is doing their assessment to determine exactly what that was. But when I was in Rolling Fork on Saturday, in Rolling Fork, they said it was 15 seconds. Right, and so 15 seconds, 1-5. They said they heard the warning, they took shelter, and it was about 15 seconds later that it was gone. Something that was just seconds on themselves.
Is there any concern that the existing infrastructure in a place like Rolling Fork, I mean, we're landing in Jackson, Mississippi, is the infrastructure at a point in Rolling Fork in the surrounding area where even with this 30 days of funding, are there concerns beyond that this community will access to what they need?
I think that they're making great strides already in repairing the infrastructure. I was able to talk to Amory just this morning. He said they've lifted all of their boil water notices and that the power is expected to be 100% restored shortly. I know in Rolling Fork some of the same things. I think what we do is facilities were damaged. We want to make sure as they're rebuilding them, we're rebuilding them to a higher code that has greater wind resistance. These high winds.
Governor Reeves has been a critic of this administration. Can you describe how the collaboration with his administration?
Reeves was incredibly grateful for our visit. I called him early in the morning on Saturday before he had even gone out to do his assessments. He gave his initial. He was with me and Secretary Mayorkas all day on Saturday to make sure we're seeing what he was concerned about, and so the relationship has nothing but a cordial.
He'll be on the ground today
He will be
with the First Lady.
Or will the federal government be there for as long as it takes?
Oh, we'll be there to the very end, right? We will be there for the years ahead as they go through the recovery process. What the 30 days is 100%. We can help get that debris out of there, right? We want to push it out as quickly as possible. So these communications rebuilding process that requires overtime as well, and so we know that these communities could be crash strapped, and we want to get that funding flowing. What it take to help begin this recovery process.
All right, the president is asking for
Okay.
so much. Thank you. Okay, I have two things at the top, and then we'll get going. Two more things at the top. Give me 1 second. Today's Transgender Day of Visibility. It's a day where we celebrate the joy, strength, and courage of transgender Americans and their families and loved ones who support them. These are Americans who serve in our military and help keep our nation safe and free, and they are Americans who strengthen our communities and make them better. As you all know well, this community is under relentless attacks from Republicans across the country rather than uplifting or supporting everyone in our community. Issues matter to the American people. They want to target transgender Americans and take away their freedoms. They don't want to talk about things that would make Americans' lives better. They don't want to they want to take away people's freedoms and their access. So today, the administration recognizes the trans community, and stands alongside it. Has your back, and we have your back, and we will not stop fighting for you. Yesterday, one last thing, First Lady and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, Chavez's granddaughter and current assistant to the President and Director Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, planted Caesar roses in the White House Rose Garden. The roses in the White House Rose Garden will be on display for members of the public during spring garden tours this weekend. In 2000, Cesar Chavez Rose was created as a collaboration between a California rose grower and its laborers as a dedication to the memory of farm workers' rights. In 2022, 20 years later, in the observance of Cesar Chavez Day, the first marks at a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services naturalization ceremony at the National Cesar Chavez California. With that, Colleen.
Okay, two things. Any comment on Trump's indictment?
Heard from the president just earlier this morning on the South Lawn before taking off for this trip to Mississippi. Look, we're just not going to comment on any, and I'll just leave it there.
And then second, has the president spoken with the family of Evan Gershkovich?
Have any conversations to read out to all of you. You also heard the president speak to Evan's situation. I wish I had breakthrough news or breakthrough update for all of you. I just do not. The State Department is working counselor, as I mentioned yesterday, to Evan, which is something that we do for all Americans that are detained, and to actually have contact with him.
Can I ask on that? For Americans, no matter what their designation, but once somebody's designated wrongfully detained, the amount of stuff that the U.S. does for them dramatically changes. How quickly do you think the State Department can? Do you see that in a matter of days or weeks? You know, obviously it's a process, and you've said that before, but is the president telling State Department to move more quickly than they normally do, or as quickly as they can to get this done?
So, Michael, I can tell you, for this president, really, truly, for any American that is detained, it is a priority for this president. And so the State Department is going through, and they have to go through this process, and before he can be named or detained. Also, there's privacy concerns. This is incredibly, as you can understand, we have to be very careful. So there's privacy situation connected to every one of these cases. But this is, again, a priority for this president. For the National Security Council, it is a priority for the State Department, and I'm going to leave it there. But they are doing everything that they.
Is the president going to, first of all, how long do you think it will take? And is the president going to tell the secretary?
I understand the question, and I actually answered it. Every American that is detained, it is indeed a priority. The president said from the beginning of this administration,
Answer the question.
Because I just told you it's a priority. This is a priority.
it take, and is the president going to tell the Secretary of State to accelerate it?
I am telling you that there's a concern.
Things that aren't the answer to the question, but I'm asking you, will you answering the question?
You may not like the answer to the question.
But it is.
Back and forth, but you also have colleagues who want to ask me questions.
Was the president, was he briefed?
I feel like I'm answering the question. Steve, you go.
Was the president briefed on the Trump indictment?
Look, we found out, all of us, including the president, found out about the news yesterday, just like every other American, through the news reports. His chief of staff, Jeff Zients, let him know what occurred through media reports, just like, again, just found out when it was not given a heads up. Again, through media reports, that's how we learned about
That limit, House Republicans have said they may introduce a standalone item to increase the debt limit that would also. Would the president be willing to sit down with Speaker McCarthy and negotiate over that, or is his bottom line still that the Republicans release the budget?
We've been very clear, very, very clear. We are not negotiating over something that is their constitutional duty to get done. This is, when you think about what happened 3 times in the last administration, this is something that Democrats came together with Republicans to make sure that we dealt with something that was incredible. When we talk about the debt limit, it should be done without conditions. And so, again, we're not negotiating this of this nation, and so we should not be holding that hostage. Now, separate and apart, as we have been saying over and over again, the Republicans want to talk about a budget, want to show us what they value, what they see as fiscally responsible, and show that to the American people. Happy to do that. We put out our budget 3 weeks ago. They still have yet to do that. And so we want to see. Let's see their budget. Let's see what we will negotiate on.
So bottom line, standalone bill, not enough for Speaker McCarthy to get a meeting.
What we're saying, and we've been very, the debt that should be dealt with without conditions, without negotiations.
On the Trump indictment, is the White House concerned about the possibility of civil unrest and being in New York or elsewhere?
So what I will say is the president certainly, and we've said this many times before, he supports America peacefully, and I'm just not going to get into speculations from here on what may or may not happen. Clearly, prepared. This government is always prepared, but it's not going to get into speculation.
Do you share the Kremlin's assessment that journalists that are accredited in Russia are safe?
This yesterday as well. When it comes to Americans being detained, we know that this is something that the Kremlin has used for a long time. This is not unusual. What to make that happen. We've also said, do not travel to Russia. It is not safe for Americans. I'll leave that there.
Does the White House or does the president have a message to believe that this Trump indictment is political?
Again, we're just not going to comment on an ongoing case. We're going to be commenting on. We've been pretty consistent and prudent about that. We're just not going to comment on it. All right.
They're saying there's some political element. I mean, do you want to respond to that at all, Karine?
I'll say this. You're seeing the president and the first lady in Mississippi today to survey a disaster that occurred over the weekend, to make sure that he is there for the community and to let them know that we are here tomorrow. And from the director of FEMA, and that is something that the president wants. That's his job. That's why he's. The president has always been focused on delivering on his economic policy, making sure that we're lowering costs for Americans. that we see that that Republicans are putting forth. If you think about it, I just talked about Trans Visibility Day. We talked about the anti-LGBT legislatures, the anti-trans legislation that are across that we're seeing across the country. The president is going to fight to have their backs day in and day out. Look, if Republicans want to join us on delivering on what they wanted to do during the midterms, is lowering costs, he's willing to do that. That conversation occurred about 12 hours ago. We're not going to comment on an ongoing case, but today the president found this trip to Mississippi is incredibly important for that community to show that we are there for them in this terrible time.
Just real quickly on the Taiwanese president, seems to be some harsh words from a lot of action. Do you believe, does the White House believe their response is, I guess, less severe than you all expected?
So I did this yesterday, and I'll say this. Reason for Beijing to turn this transit, which is consistent with longstanding U.S. policy and practice, into something that is or to overreact. Transit are clear. It is consistent with longstanding U.S. practice. It is consistent with our longstanding unofficial relationship with Taiwan, and it is consistent with the United States One China policy. Remains unchanged. It is Taiwan's decision to make these transit based on their own travel. Transits are not visits. They are private and President Tsai, has done this type of transit 6 times. Again, there is no reason for there is no reason for China to overreact. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Karine.